Adrian in the frame.
Recording. Okay, so I would like to introduce David Andelman, who is sitting here behind me. And his bio, okay, I don't know if you can see this. It's ridiculous. Okay?
So many ways.
Well, it's ridiculous because the man has so many achievements that the list just goes on and on and on. And Red Line in the Sand happens to be his latest book, and I have it right here. And I have read it, and there are several copies that he will sell for 30 euros and sign. So I highly recommend that you take advantage of it. He's also the author of A Shattered Piece. And I think there's a few copies of A Shattered Piece, which is 20 euros, and he will sign that one as well. And there is one copy of one of his older books, Fourth World War. Okay? So I highly recommend that you take advantage of this opportunity. And just to tell you one of his most recent and most important accomplishments is he was anointed the French Legion of Honor. That's a big deal, okay? So David is the journalist of the journalists, of the all-time journalists, and his accomplishments blow me away. And so I'm very, very pleased that he's here today. And you know what? I think it's time to let David speak for himself.
There we are.
Instead of me. You want me to leave the books?
Whatever you like.
Well, I'll leave them here.
Okay.
Okay, that way they're on camera the whole time.
There you are.
And I'll take this bio with me.
Okay. It's easily replicatable. Thank you. And what a hostess we have. Don't we have an amazing hostess? Let's have a round of applause for Adrian. Adrian and I go back 20 years, but she goes back with my wife, and when they were both this high.
That's true.
In New Orleans, Louisiana.
That's true.
And yes, indeed.
David's wife and I went to
NOLA.
Sunday school at
Sunday
synagogue
school
together.
Yes, indeed. So we have a long relationship in our family to each other. But thank you. It's a great pleasure, privilege. I've been waiting for a very long time to be able to do this, all the way through COVID and even before. And it's a privilege to meet all of you and see all of you, and I'm delighted you came out for this. So, A Red Line in the Sand. There's all kinds of ways this could go. What I'm going to do is talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. I do not like to hear myself talk, which is kind of astonishing considering all my time in television and radio and other places, but I don't. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you have to say and what your thoughts are, and the questions, of course. I'm used to answering questions even though I'm most accustomed to asking them. So that's where I am now. So the Red Line in the Sand that's the name of the book, the title of the book. And it divides itself very neatly into two halves. So one half is a line in the sand. Now, that was drawn from the Bible, the New Testament, actually. When Jesus drew in the book of John, when the Pharisees brought to him an adulteress who under Mosaic law should have been stoned to death, he drew a line in the sand and said, "He who is without sin, cross this line and cast your first stone." That was the first line in the sand. Now, the red line. Now that's very interesting. For that we have to go back to Crimea. We all know about Crimea nowadays, but Crimea has long been a scene of a series of wars and revolutions and unrest. This was in 1854. It was the start of chapter 2 of my book. We're in October of that year, and the Crimean War has pitted the forces of Britain, France, and Turkey against who else? Russia, of course. This was Russia under the Tsars, of course. And it's reaching its peak, and we're at the Battle of Balaclava. The Battle of Balaclava had on the British side, they had the 93rd Highlanders under Sir Colin Campbell. They had taken refuge from the Russian long-range artillery behind this rise, this little hill. Right? So they couldn't really be seen, but advancing on the British, unaware of their exact position, were 4 Kiev Hussar squadrons, the Tsar's troops. Suddenly, Campbell ordered the Highlanders to show themselves. They appeared abruptly from nowhere, blocking the entire path of the charging cavalry. They had all their bayonets on the ready, fixed to their sword, to their muskets, and threw the Russians in utter confusion. Now, as it happens, there was one of my colleagues, many generations, of course, before, a journalist, a great wordsmith and foreign correspondent for the Times of London. His name was William Howard Russell. He was one of the most accomplished foreign correspondents of his time, or indeed any time. So I'm going to read to you a line that from his dispatch in the London Times. The Russians on their left drew breath for a moment and then, in one grand line, charged in toward Balaclava. The ground flew beneath their horses' feet. Gathering speed at every stride, they dashed onto that thin red streak tipped with a line of steel. Well, the red streak was, of course, the British redcoats, and the line of steel was their bayonets. That very quickly got, bowdlerized, changed, misquoted, and it became, instead of the thin red streak, the thin red line. And that's where the second half of my book title came from. So, what are red lines? Well, you all know what red lines are. Everybody talks about them, right? There are more. I've made a study of red lines, and I have this little organization I found, a research group called the Red Lines Project, and we made a study of red lines all over the world. There are more red lines in existence today than at any other single moment in history, believe it or not. Now, some of that was, I'm afraid, a tribute to Donald Trump, who loved establishing them and then tearing them down at a moment's notice at will almost all over the world. But this is the very moment when there are more red lines in history, and everybody is suddenly paying real attention to them. I'm just going to quote from Vladimir Putin. This was in April of 2021. April of 2021, think about that. That was a year before he even thought about invading Ukraine. And he says, he was speaking to the Duma, the Russian parliament. And he said, I have just to make it clear, we have enough patience, responsibility, professionalism, self-confidence, and certainty in our cause, as well as common sense, when making a decision of any kind. But I hope that no one will think about crossing the red line with regard to Russia. We ourselves will determine in each specific case where it will be drawn. Now, as it happens, that is the worst possible kind of red line for anyone that works. One guy decides this is where it's going to be, this is what's going to be the red line, and that's it, with no understanding of the stakes behind it, the will or the interest of the other side that may or may not respect it. And so this is the kind of red lines he's been drawing all around the old Soviet Union and now Mother Russia. So one thing I did in the book that people often ask me about is what are the best and the most effective red lines, what are the worst and the least effective? So I'm just going to run them down, and then we can go back, and I'm going to ask you to ask me questions about any of these, and we can go back and talk to any of them about any of them specifically. The best and most effective red lines, I think, in history have been the red lines surrounding NATO. That's a red line that has never really been breached, actually. No one has ever actually dared attack NATO in that sense. Partly because of Article 5. Does anybody here know what Article 5 is of the NATO treaty? I bet the ambassador over in the corner does. How many people know what Article 5 is? Oh, pretty good, pretty good. Yes, Article 5, of course, says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Does anybody know how many times it's been invoked in its history?
Once.
Right. And when was that? 9/11. Right. That was the only time Article 5 was ever invoked, and that is frankly the reason why we wound up in Afghanistan for so long. So again, we got basically all of our NATO partners to back us up on that. So that's, I think, one of the more effective red lines. The other is the North-South red line in Korea. That's lasted since the Korean War, and leaving aside all of the problems nowadays with the nuclear part of that red line, which has had more or less of a checkered history, but the actual red line itself that established North and South Korea, divided the two countries, that's worked pretty well. I mean, South Korea has become one of the most prosperous countries in the world. North Korea is a basket case, basically. The third, I would say, also is the JCPOA. The JCPOA is more commonly known as the Iran Treaty, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Until Donald Trump took us out of that and basically tried to destroy it, that actually worked pretty well as a red line. It was really containing Iran. I mean, it would have been 20 or 25 years before Iran would have actually developed a nuclear weapon. So I say that is one of the more effective ones. Thank you. I've actually finished with that page, but why not? Okay. How about the worst or the least effective ones? Well, One is the South China Sea. That's been least affected because basically it's not mutual in any respect. The Chinese have been putting up these little red lines around each one of these little islands that they've been dotting all over the South China Sea for decades now. And no one's basically been respecting them. So that hasn't worked very well. Iran and Iraq, that has never been a mutually respected red line at all. In fact, it's a complete basket case right now. It's dropped out of the news, but trust me, the Iranians are still in there subsidizing Iraqi militia and so on, the Shiite militia, and that really hasn't worked very well at all. And the final one, of course, was the Syria sarin gas red line of Barack Obama. And that's the one everybody asks me about the most, and I do spend some pages talking about that and how badly it was misconstrued. And the reason was it didn't work very well. It was just one of these red lines that was a result of an offhanded remark thrown out at will without being ever really being thought through very carefully, which is the best kind of red line, the kind that is really thought through very carefully about the implications of it, or why it was established, or the motivations, or who's going to enforce it, or why. So all of that is very important. So I think I'll stop right here, and I'm going to ask for questions, and then we can start our dialogue. We have one right here.
I have a question because in your book, okay, you talk a lot about, or a part about, Donald Trump's redlining, which was a bit excessive.
Right.
I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but I'd be interested in knowing more.
Well, yes. And actually, it's clear that Adrian really has read my book. That's very impressive, I must say.
And it is.
It's actually a very exciting book, and there's a page turner, but there's a lot of it. So a lot of pages, that is. But and some very interesting photographs and maps and so on that also took me a long time to assemble, which I think are really worth the price of the book in many ways. At any rate, Trump. Well, you know, the problem is not only the red lines he established, but the red lines he took down. And both of those, I think, are very important. The red lines he took down, I think, are pretty clear. The Iran Treaty, COP21, the environmental treaty, the Worldwide Environmental Treaty. I was actually I spent 2 weeks at Le Bourget Field outside of Paris, where that treaty was actually negotiated and signed back in some years ago now. So I know what went into that, and it was quite extraordinary, the efforts that went into that and the compromises and so on. And in a single stroke of the pen, you know, to take down that red line was an extraordinarily poor idea. At the same time, I mean, he began establishing red lines in conjunction with the Russians, in conjunction with some of our, you know, other more or less allies. He established red lines all over Africa, simply by not allowing the the local countries to really take control of their own handling of the militia groups that were coming in and the jihadists. So really it was really the last 4 years was really quite a disaster in terms of red lines that were created, and even more importantly, the red lines that were taken down or destroyed that should have persisted. Yes, a former CBS person.
Yes, I have a question. In today's Guardian, Pope Francis was saying that somehow he was in a conversation in a run-up to the war in which he was warned NATO was barking at the gates of Russia. So
who said that? I'm sorry.
Pope Francis.
Oh, Pope Francis. Yeah.
Yes, he was in a conversation with somebody whom he didn't name.
Yeah.
Who said that NATO was barking at the gates of Russia as an excuse for Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Well, first of all, I have to say Pope Francis has been actually quite eloquent in his defense of Ukraine and his opposition to what Russia has done there, and he's made that very clear, I believe, to the Russians, and that's very good. You know, look, NATO has really tried to stay very much to itself until and always has until it's been provoked. And in this case, it's really been provoked, and there's no question about that. It's been provoked mainly, I think, by, and not so much because of the red lines that Russia's been trying to reestablish around its own country. It's been provoked simply by the failure of one country to respect a very old concept. It goes back really to the 17th century of one country, of nations respecting their own borders. We went into that in some detail in the Fourth World War. Marange was my co-author, was the longtime head of French intelligence. He was the longest-serving head of any Western intelligence agency. He began with de Gaulle and he continued on through Mitterrand. And an extraordinary thinker. He was really sort of the Henry Kissinger of France. And he said that he used to say that, you know, countries should be able to be allowed to do whatever they want within their own country. And if they, you know, if they want to have a dictatorship, if they want to have, you know, no respect for their civil rights, good luck to them. But what really is important is when they start affecting their neighbors, and when they go outside of their borders and try to work their will on their neighbors. Just as an example, Saddam Hussein, when he went and invaded Kuwait, that's just beyond the pale. It's you know, you can't have anarchy in terms of international relations like that. So that's the concern. I think Pope Francis has that concern as well, and I think that's what has been trying to convey to Putin, that we have to respect our neighbors and we have to respect the rights of our neighbors to exist as nations, and not try to simply, you know, because we think we're stronger or you know, because we can conquer them, that we should have the right to do that. That's just not right.
Yeah, Putin doesn't care.
Right. Well, exactly. And you know, the interesting thing is Putin has gotten worse as he's gotten older, which is really kind of depressing for all of us. My wife says I get worse in so many respects as I get older. You know, I'm 77 now, and I mean, she's known me for 20 years at least, so she's been able to watch the derivation. But really, it's Adrian is laughing. She knows exactly what I'm talking about.
I get it. I get it. I'm getting worse.
Right. So, but you know, the point is that he is now basically like Xi Jinping in China, in theory, president for life, and that is very scary because he's not going to get any better, and he's only going to get worse. And he's been able to bring his country behind him, what is left of his country. One of the things I'm involved in right now is I'm the past president of the Overseas Press Club of America, which is the great society of American foreign correspondents and so on. And what we're trying to do now, I'm chairing a committee there to try to help Ukrainian journalists and also journalists from Belarus and Russia who had to leave. One of the things that we've noticed is that when they come outside of these countries, they've left behind their entire lives. They've left behind a whole system. And one of my colleagues who left Russia, Andrei Soldatov, who's a wonderful writer and actually an expert in the FSB, the Soviet Security Forces. And he's now based in London. He's at London School of Economics, I believe. But he says there are over 100,000 Russians have left, and it's the cream of the crop. The creme de la creme of Russia has left and is now in the West, basically, and may never go back. And we're talking everything from 20-year-old IT specialists all the way up to, you know, business people of some considerable, you know, prominence and capacity, scholars. Basically, much of the intellectual class of Russia is gone. And with it has gone really a lot of what could make Russia great. And it will never be great again in that respect because of that. So it's hard to understand what Putin can visualize is a Russia that he will be ruling, but obviously it'll be a monolithic Russia that really pays court to him. And unfortunately, the people who have been willing to pay court to him are not people who will make a society better or greater or really improve the humanity's intellectual capacity or ability to move forward. So that's unfortunately where we're headed, I think, in Russia.
Warmongers don't think of those things, though, David.
No. And
their egos are too wrapped up in it.
Well, they are, and then you have to say to yourself, so, and that's another thing. Oh, sorry, please.
If I can be a devil's advocate.
Yeah. Okay, please.
First of all, I agree wholeheartedly, I think with everybody's view that Putin is a warmonger and a militarist. That can undeniable, and the fault of this in war in the Ukraine is entirely, well, not entirely, but predominantly Putin and Russia's the guilty party, without doubt. My worry is, however, that to understand what happens in the world, you've got to be able to try and look through the lens of the other side. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough, many years ago, I actually visited the old Soviet Union a couple of times.
I've been in 19 times.
Yeah, well, one of the things that struck me was the psychological impact of the Second World War, where they lost 27 million people fighting the Nazis.
Yep.
Now, they are, whether we agree with them or not, they are paranoid about their borders.
Oh, sure.
And when I think of the Russians, I think if I was a normal Russian, whether it's right or not, I would see the expansion of NATO towards their borders, either one country, all the former satellites, etc., and then Ukraine declaring in their constitution they're going to join NATO as well, as something which would scare a lot of Russians. And I'm not saying it's right, but I think unless we are able to actually understand that and realise that we're not going to be able to have any dialogue, not going to be able to understand or work our way through the problems in the world.
Oh, no, sure.
I think it's easy to just demonise and just say Putin is a new Hitler and they're lunatics. And
But Putin is not a Gorbachev.
no, I
Right.
agree.
That's true.
He's not
That's
trying to actually restore the Soviet Union. He's trying to restore the Romanov Tsarist Empire. Actually.
There's probably something to that. There's no doubt about that. But no, I do think he's trying to restore as much as he said. One of the great reversals in history was when the Soviet Union was ended and broke apart. There's no doubt about that. But remember, it wasn't just the Soviet Union. Then he also had another outer buffer of the East European satellite countries. I was actually the East European bureau chief for the New York Times back in the 1970s, and before I came to CBS in Paris. And I have to tell you, I mean, those countries were run in many respects even more diligently, more viciously in many respects than the Soviet Union then, and that's all gone. But not all of it is gone. I mean, if you look in Hungary is still very much Viktor Orban is very much in the old apparatchik mentality, the prime minister of Hungary, and that's a little bit scary. But you know, the fact is that these two systems, the democratic system and the Russian system, should be able to coexist, and the Western side is prepared to let it coexist. And Russia, for some reason, is not. You know, Putin, when he first came into office, seemed to indicate that he had some interest in really reaching a condominium with the West. And then this gradually began to deteriorate, and it got worse and worse. I think where it really began to go off the rails was when he began building an apparatus around himself that was very much in his thinking. And, you know, it was interesting when Angela Merkel was Chancellor of Germany. She used to call him every week or so just to talk to him on the phone. And I knew one of her military aides who said to her, "Why do you do that?" And he told me the story. She said, "I do it because I want him to hear another voice in his ear other than the echo chamber of all of the same, you know, apparatchiks around him that are giving him the same thoughts and the same ideas." And that's my concern right now, is that's now he has no voice in his ear like that. And so what a lot of people say to me, well, we should just get rid of Putin. Everything will be solved, and it won't. I have a very good friend, Mikhail Zygar, who was one of the founders of Dozh, TV Rain, which was the dissident opposition television station in Russia. He is now in Berlin in exile. He was told by his father he had 2 hours. His father was, by the way, was an ex-GRU colonel. That's the Russian intelligence. But he got a call from his father, said the FSB is coming for you in 2 hours. Get out of town. This was just after Putin invaded Ukraine. So Mikhail left. But he had written a book several years ago called All the Kremlin's Men, and he looked at the entire circus around Putin. These are the people who would ultimately succeed him if Putin were taken out in some fashion, or if he were forced to resign, or if he were locked up in a loony bin because he really did go off the deep end. And you look at someone like Medvedev. Medvedev was the person that he handpicked to be his successor. Medvedev's policies weren't that much different from Putin's. They basically were the same. I suspect he might not have chosen to invade Ukraine at that point. But now that this has happened, I suspect that any of the people who might succeed Putin, that's the kind of people we have there. And the people who might really be able to mount an opposition to him, who might have been able to, form a foundation of some kind of a real opposition, they're all gone. At least 100,000 of them. They've gone into the West, and they've had it with the Soviet Union, with Russia. Freudian slip, Soviet Union. I'm always calling Russia the Soviet Union. I don't know why. I'm so used to doing it for so many years, actually visiting it when it was called the Soviet Union. But it's very it's really very difficult to imagine what kind of a person would replace Putin that wouldn't simply be I won't even say Putin light. I will say Putin younger, more intelligent, more focused, and perhaps even more determined and more
Maybe
capable.
even scarier.
And even scarier, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're going to have to face that because the reports that you read that he's on the verge of
May I make a
death
plea
bed.
from the back row to people speak up?
Speak up a little bit, yeah.
Really can barely hear.
Sorry, it's.
Can you hear me all right?
No.
Oh,
Unfortunately, when you were speaking, giving your main presentation, we could hear you. As soon as you started answering questions,
okay.
along with the people who were
Project.
asking questions, we
Okay.
could barely hear you.
I'll keep trying. Go ahead.
What I've read on the internet recently is that Putin is going to die soon. He's apparently has some mysterious illness.
There's all kinds of stories about him having cancer, about him having some other mysterious illness, and so on. No one really knows. I mean, he's very. I mean, I've just finished, by the way, the manuscript of a very interesting book that I'm a member of this club in New York called the Grolier Club, which is a rare book collectors club. One of the members is a neurologist from New York, and he has been following FDR's medical history. And he has really assembled this extraordinary book about how really sick FDR was, having nothing to do with polio, and what actually killed him. I mean, he had multiple different types of cancer. He had high blood pressure. He had all sorts of interesting illnesses that nobody knew about, that they kept secret. And that was in the United States. They were able to keep secret because there was this sort of conspiracy of silence, even among the press that covered him. Well, you can imagine what it's like in Russia, where everything is controlled. I mean, the fact that the prospects of our ever hearing from, from any of Putin's doctors are virtually nil. It's just not going to happen until one day. I mean, but the same was true. I mean, I go all the way back to Brezhnev. I was at Brezhnev's funeral, in fact, for CBS, and no one knew up until the last moment. Brezhnev was sick for years and years, and no one really knew up until the last moment that he had even died. I mean, it was they could have kept that secret probably for a very long time until one day they had to drag him out onto the top of Lenin's mausoleum for some parade. So that's the kind of society where you don't really know what's happening, and that's what's so scary about it.
That's true here too.
Sorry?
That's true here too.
Well, no. I mean, I think that.
Look at all the secrecy really around John Kennedy, for example. What really went on with John Kennedy?
Well, actually, I have to tell you something. I think since Kennedy, that really is what changed the whole way we cover presidents. There was this sense of you don't talk about John Kennedy's
affairs,
peccadillos, shall we say? Right.
bad
peccadillos,
back.
what have you? Right. Marilyn Monroe. But since then, I mean, all gloves are off now. I can't imagine it would be very hard to keep any kind of secret for how badly the health of an American president, as you can in Russia about the health of a Kremlin leader. So, because they simply don't show themselves that often, and they certainly don't submit to annual physicals or whatever that are documented. You can't imagine Putin's doctor going out and having a press conference after his annual physical, which is sort of de rigueur in the White House. You have to do that.
But you can't believe anything that comes out of the press from Russia anyway.
Well, not from the Russian press, no.
No.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, there are so few Western reporters that are able to work there now. It's going to be increasingly difficult to find out. Western reporters, even when I was there, we had sources within the hierarchy and so on that we could talk to off the record on background. A lot of those reporters have gone. Now you can pick up the phone, but a lot of these people did not want to talk on the phone about some of these things. You got to meet them, and that's going to be impossible now. So I'm really concerned about the level of depth of our reporting of Russia at a very moment in time when Russia is transforming itself, when the red lines, which are the most important part in many respects of Russia and its relationship with the world, are also in a state of flux. I mean, that's very concerning to me.
So do you think you wrote the book?
We have now someone else wants to ask a question
Okay.
back there. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Can you speak up a little bit yourself? I happen to be deaf in one ear, so I've.
Most of my career working on the Middle East and North Africa, including Syria. I worked right up until towards the end of the first Obama administration. I want to thank you, first of all, and I haven't read your actual account of what happened in 2013, but I want to thank you for correcting the record, because it's certainly a problem here in France in terms of the French, especially Francois Hollande's recapitulation of what happened back in 2013, that Obama's red line on chemical weapons was basically an off-the-cuff remark, or it was not something that he scripted to say, and it was something that I can tell you, having heard from people in the White House at the time who were working on all of these things, where everybody was scrambling, to catch up to it. And lo and behold, the Syrians actually used chemical weapons, and then suddenly the U.S. was caught having to live up to this red line. So, having said all of that, important question. To what extent do you believe that this kind of diplomacy in the era of 24/7 news, with microphones pointed in front of world leaders, especially on the Western side, as opposed to any other side? We've seen it with Biden. Can that slip of the tongue sort of create a red line situation? And how should the media, how should government be dealing with that? The second thing, which is sort of related to this, is how you assess groupthink.
How do you assess what?
Groupthink
Oh.
in foreign policy, which I believe in terms of Russia and long-standing American policy towards Moscow has been an enduring problem going back to the 30s and the 40s.
Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, look, we live in a free society, and I don't think we can put muzzles on our leaders. I mean, they have to be able to. They should be free to speak their mind, but I think it's up to the leaders to be reflective of just what the consequences of their words is going to be, and that's something that a lot of world leaders don't understand the need for. There's also, I have to say one thing, and I hope I'll get to the rest of your question. If I forget what it is, which I probably will, you'll have to remind me. But I had a professor at Harvard, Henry Kissinger, before he became a big deal. He taught at Harvard, and he taught a government course, Government 101, and he used to say, I think that's what it was. He used to say that he had this concept he loved called Weltanschauung. Does anybody know what Weltanschauung is? Okay.
Your view of the world.
Worldview, right, exactly. Weltanschauung means worldview in German. And he loved the concept of Weltanschauung. He said his problem with most American presidents, in fact, many world leaders, is they don't have a Weltanschauung. They don't have a real sense of what the world should be like, what it's like going into their administration, and how they would like to see it come out of the administration. And that's something that was very important to him. And he said there were very few American presidents who had that. Most American presidents just ping pong from crisis to crisis. And they get one crisis is over, and another one whacks them, and then whack back and forth. And there's no sense of direction, of a real direction of where they're taking the country or the world for that matter. He believed, for instance, that Nixon had that, and I thought, of course, he believed that because he was the one who had the concept of Weltanschauung, and he was leading Nixon by the nose, in all of this. But there's something to be said for that. But think about the last few presidents. How many presidents have really had that sense of Weltanschauung? I believe FDR did. I think he had that. Maybe Truman. I'm not so sure about that. Everybody else after that really was reacting to crises for the most part. It's interesting that someone I respect very highly said to me the other day that he thought that it was Michael Mandelbaum, and I will tell you about. I'm really getting off your subject, but I'll get back to it. Okay. Michael Mandelbaum was one of my oldest friends. He's now the Christian Herder Professor Emeritus of Foreign Affairs from Johns Hopkins, and he has a new book out also that's very, very good. But he said, the principal problem is that we don't have this sense of where the world is going, and that's a real situation. That's a real situation that needs to be dealt with. he did a Q&A with Tom Friedman to promote his book, and I have the entire transcript of it on my blog. By the way, I have a new website, a new Substack page called Andelman Unleashed. It's free, so I encourage you to sign up for it, all of you. And one of my business cards are on the table back there. They have the little thing on the back of it. They'll tell me how to get a hold of me and how to sign up for that. Now, I have not forgotten you. So, I forget the second half of your question.
Groupthink.
The what?
Groupthink.
Oh, groupthink. That's one thing that I just don't see how you can get away from. I mean, look, most presidents will choose advisors who think very much like they do. Then you're not going to have a Democratic president taking a conservative Republican advisor. It's just not going to happen.
Although he probably should.
Well, maybe. I mean, he wants to get things done in his own fashion. So, no, that's just not going to happen. I don't think there's groupthink in that sense. I think the danger that we have to look out for, particularly in intelligence, is that intelligence needs to really feel that it's independent of an administration. I had an old girlfriend of mine, well, before I was married, who was a CIA, she was in the CIA. She wasn't a CIA agent. She was actually on the intelligence side rather than the operations side. But she said, she was working in Cuba branch. And she was actually the political military officer for Cuba branch. And she said every time she wrote a paper, she said it had to go up to about 4 different layers before it got anywhere near policymakers. And it was always, kind of transformed after she wrote it into something that seemed to conform very much to what the administration's thinking was on, Cuba's political military posture. And that, I think, is a real problem. I think if the State Department and the CIA and the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, if they don't have the ability to think clearly and present a view that the analysts who are really out there in the field working on this subject really understand carefully, I think we're going to have a real problem in the future. And that I think is where the real groupthink comes in. If it's going to influence the way the product of our intelligence and the product of the way we look at the world, that's a huge mistake. Did that answer your question at all?
Well, no, I largely agree. I mean, I think having worked in the intelligence community as well as the State Department, one of the big problems is, the groupthink actually changes with administrations slightly. May not change in terms of sort of core principles, at least leaving aside the Trump administration. But the problem is that most people know, whether they're in the intelligence community or in policymaking community, they know what's expected of them if they are going to be promoted and if they are going to go on to other jobs that are better than the ones that they're in currently.
Well, my friend, she wasn't worried about promotion actually, although she ultimately did do very well. She became a national intelligence officer. She became NIO for warning and NIO for econ, both very high-ranking operations with the National Intelligence Council. So she was very well respected, very highly thought of, and everybody knew you always got the straight thing from Karen. She's now retired, so I can use her first name anyway. But like she used to say, when at a cocktail party, they'd say, "What do you do?" She'd say, "Well, I could tell you what I do, but then I'd have to kill you." So she could always tell if the person was worth talking to if they'd say, "Oh, really?" Or if they understood it was a joke. But anyway, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is a problem. Yes, sir.
No question.
You have a question?
No, I had no question.
No, it's the guy behind you.
Oh, I thought you were waiting for a question. Who else has a question? Come on, someone does.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge. It's very fascinating. I want some clarification of something that you said, and I want to kind of delve into your opinion. You mentioned that in red lines, there was an understanding that as long as the country's internal problems remain internal, that red lines should be that a country has no right to go and, kind of force your own interests in that country. So this is an issue that I've been wrestling with, and I wanted your opinion. I think that's true, and certainly you can't intervene in every situation. But what if within a country you have wholesale genocide?
Yeah, I think that absolutely, and this is one of the things we did deal with it to a degree in this book. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the United Nations was set up and why certain UN organizations were set up, for the ability to actually intervene in places like that, like Rwanda. And I know that situation pretty well. I knew Kagame, the president of Rwanda. I know him very well, actually, and he was involved in all that. But you know, the fact is that there are international organizations able to that have been able were designed to deal with that. Unfortunately, in the UN, it's mainly the Security Council when it really comes to armed intervention. And I think we made a huge mistake with the veto concept in the Security Council. Now, it may have been the only way to get the Soviet Union and Stalin into the United Nations. That's neither here nor there. But I was just in this book I was reading about FDR that hasn't been published yet, unfortunately. My agent's working on it with him, but anyway. But he's apparently FDR was very sick at Yalta, and he really gave in to Stalin on a whole lot of issues that he probably should not have given into. I hope they're not breaking a whole lot of stuff down.
A lot of glass being broken. It's a busy corner.
Yeah, okay. I think that was a huge mistake at Yalta that we made. One of the reasons we made it, of course, was FDR was very anxious to get the Soviet Union into World War II in Asia against Japan. And of course, by the time they actually, declared war on Japan, the Soviet Union, was the day after we bombed Hiroshima, so it was kind of ridiculous by then. But that's the problem. There really isn't an international body that's able to go in and say something is outrageous and go in and take care of it. I mean, we should be doing something about the Uyghurs. I mean, in any other small country, there would be a huge outcry, and there would have been calls for a United Nations force to go in. Well, but China is a permanent member of the Security Council and has a veto. It's never going to happen. So I think there really isn't a mechanism for that, and I think that absent a mechanism like that, there's really not much we can do except to say, if you invade another country or if you attempt to impose your will in another country, that's something the international community really does have to take account of, and because the whole concept of the nation state, which goes back, as I say, to the 16th century, 17th century, if that's destroyed, I mean, where are we? I mean, the world is then just a total chaos, and we can't have that. And that's one of the reasons I think the United States is quite right, and France, by the way, and Germany, is taking the lead against Russia, is really to prevent that kind of a thing from taking place. And by the way, Putin is going to Romania today and Moldavia tomorrow, specifically to say, we're going to make sure that you guys are not next. And also Georgia, of course, but he's not going there. And Moldavia is petrified. They have a new young woman president who's tough. She's a sort of a female Zelensky in some ways. I can see that. But they see themselves as the next place to get gobbled up once Putin gets finished with Ukraine. So it's very scary.
Do you think that's what's going to happen? He's going to finish off Ukraine?
I don't think I think he's going to have a very hard time finishing off Ukraine. I think he's going to have a very hard time actually taking over that entire. People don't understand how huge Ukraine is. Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe after Russia. I mean, it's bigger than any other country in Europe. It's a huge territory. It's bigger than the entire southwestern part of the United States. So to say that he's going to actually take over and run this huge country, considering he can't even really make much headway against one small sliver of it in the east, in the Donbass, I don't know how he's going to do that. I think he's in for a huge quagmire if he ever tries to do that. Is that it? Can I go home? Nope, we got another one here. Yeah.
No, we're not letting you home yet.
I would just like your perspective on what's happening with the French legislative elections.
The French elections. You should be reading my Substack column. I had like eight columns leading up to 8 weeks leading up to the presidential, and I've just published my fourth column on the legislatives yesterday.
I'm glad Marilyn asked this because I was just going to ask you to move over to the French elections.
Okay.
So perfect.
So I'm waiting for the second round next week. You realize that of 577 French members of parliament, only 5 have been elected so far. 5, that's it.
First round.
So, which is quite extraordinary, which means 572.
Le Pen's one of them.
I'm sorry?
Le Pen is one of them. I think.
No. But no, she's not. No. No. Actually, none of her people. There are 3. I think there are 4 Noops and one LREM. I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. Anyway, but you know the problem is that I don't think there's a very good chance that nobody will have a majority. I think, and that's a little bit scary. But I'll give you a preview of what I'm going to be talking about this coming Sunday when it actually happens. Even without a majority, I think that Macron might be all right. And the reason is that nobody else will have a majority either. And the Noops are such a bizarre sort of, conglomeration of forces. There will be not a whole lot of actual core France Insoumise, France Unbowed, Mélenchon people who will actually be in the Noops in that new parliament. So you also have, for instance, you'll have you'll have a bunch of ecology people. You'll have a bunch of socialists. You'll have, a few, maybe a couple of communists even. There are actually communists who are in the second round. They're not the old kind of Russian communists, by the way, but they're, anyway. But, so I think that Macron could what he will have to do probably is for every major initiative, you'll have to put together a little coalition for each initiative, which is kind of a pain in the ass to do. I mean, that takes a lot of work. But I think that, for instance, he has a huge ecological program he wants to the environmental program he wants to put together. And I think that the ecologists, they'll go over to him for that. I mean, they don't want to be tied to Mélenchon, who, by the way, won't even have a seat because he didn't even run. But his people, they don't have a real sense of any ecology. What they want to do is they want to get rid of disestablish the Fifth Republic and establish a Sixth Republic. I mean, it's crazy. They want to give over 1,000 euros to every young person in this country, whether they have a job or not, as kind of a minimum. I mean, things that will bankrupt the country and will do very little to help France maintain itself as a viable leader of Europe. So I'm not as worried about that as some people are, but I still think that it would be good if he got a real clear majority. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
So I am reading your column every column that you're writing because I'm learning about the French political
Yep.
process. One of the things you said, I think it was yesterday, that was kind of frightening, was that you thought the French really don't want any leader to have a majority and to be able to put their programs forth freely. That's horrifying because we can watch the quagmire in the United States when you get a president who doesn't have control of the Senate and you can't get anything done at all.
That's actually one of France's leading pundits who said that on Alain Duhamel. Yeah.
So how are they thinking this is good for the country if nobody's programs can ever get done? Do they think they're really going to compromise? It doesn't happen.
No. I think what they do is they want to see that they want the option of debate. And if without a majority giving one party a majority, there won't be any real debate. It'll just be a fiat, a dictate from the top. The parliament passes and it's done. So I think there are a lot of French people who consciously want that sense of the French love to debate. They love to talk. They love to dispute this kind of thing. They love to have that, and they want in the end to be able to think that the right decision is going to be made, that will come out of that cauldron of that stew pot of controversy and debate and so on. But I'm not sure again that that's the main reason. And I respect Alain enormously. Alain Duhamel goes back to 1963 when he was a young political science person, and he's been a great commenter on the French. He's now 82 years old. He used to come to my house for dinner in the early 80s when he was really when Mitterrand first came in. He was at the peak of his first peak of his power as a commentator. He'd come riding up in a motorcycle and with a helmet, and he'd walk in our front door and he'd say to my wife, "Where do I put this?" You know, and he'd throw it in the corner. So, but he's a character, but
He's the,
very, very smart guy.
he's the elder statesman on AFM.
Yeah, he's one. Yeah, he's the only guy, by the way, on most of the BFM panels that is actually wearing a necktie. Yeah, he wears a necktie everywhere, believe it or not. Yeah, we don't have a single necktie in here, do we? I was going to wear one today because I'm going to be on camera, but anyway, it's too hot. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, just to go back over your career, what is your assessment of the Fifth Estate compared to maybe other periods of time over the years?
Okay.
How, and also as it relates to the Fourth Estate, obviously. I meant the Fourth Estate, and how it relates to the Fifth Estate.
In France, in French history.
No, in the just in
The Fourth, Fifth Estate. I see. Okay, right.
Sphere, because the Fifth Estate is gaining, is people are more tuning into their telephones and the podcast more than they might be print journalism.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting about that. I have this concept of that there are two different kinds of journalism, right? There's journalism that is, I call it mediated, and then there's unmediated, right? Mediated journalism is the kind that I've done my entire life. You write a piece, you turn it into the city desk or the desk on the newspaper. It's edited by a city editor, a copy editor, another editor writes the headlines, and the news desk looks at it. If it's going to be on the front page, probably the assistant managing editor, the managing editor, and the executive editor all read it. It's read by, even now when I write for CNN, I discuss it first with the foreign editor at CNN, who's based in London. She and I talk it over. I write it. She reads it first. It then goes to usually the managing editor of CNN Opinion. He reads it. It then goes to another desk called Standards, and that I consider that's really the dark hole, and Standards has to pass it. If Standards doesn't pass it, doesn't get out there, or they have questions. Unfortunately, Standards questions really are not done by people who really understand the issue very often, but they sometimes raise some very interesting points that you say, okay, I understand that. So it goes through Standards, then it goes to the copy desk for basic copy editing, and then it gets out there. That's all what I call mediated journalism. There's something between me, my mind, my fingers, and out there. Unmediated journalism is the guy sitting on his in a wife beater on his couch in the basement with a laptop.
Me.
And just puts it out there, right?
What I do.
Well, exactly.
I'm unmediated.
That's very scary because I found all
Yes,
kinds of
it is.
mistakes. I have found how many times have I sent you emails saying that's not right,
Not
Adrian?
too often.
No, not
I
too often, but every
disagree
now
with
and
you.
then I do. All right.
No,
And
because
in
I
fact,
can say whatever I want.
Everybody here, I have offered to actually read her stuff before it goes out. She's not interested. Okay.
It's true. I get to say
But
whatever I want.
unfortunately, the average consumer of news is not sufficiently attuned to be able to tell the difference online between mediated and unmediated journalism.
That's true.
And that is very scary. My little Andelman, Unleashed, right? I make sure that my wife at least reads it, the entire thing, and she catches mistakes in it all the time.
Okay, but it's unmediated.
Well, but one other person has read it. One other person has read it. At least one other sentient human being has read it before it goes out to the world. And she catches stuff all the time in it, in every piece. And sometimes if it's really a specialized thing, I'll have another colleague of mine who I think is very good or whatever. I can't afford to hire a full-time copy editor, frankly. But they, I have a horror of stuff going out just from my mind alone. But there are millions of people out there who do that, and even a lot on Substack. Frankly, I hate to say it, but so it really is very important to become an educated reader, an informed reader, to be able to distinguish between a mediated and an unmediated piece of commentary, reportage, or whatever you're reading.
And to follow up,
Yeah.
when you were coming up, who are some of your mentors and/or individuals in your profession who you admire?
Well, I guess the person I admired the most was a fellow who hired me at the New York Times, Seymour Topping. Top just died at the age of 99 earlier this year, actually. He was an extraordinary figure. He was foreign editor of the Times when he hired me as his news assistant on the foreign desk. This was I started 2 days before Christmas in 1968. And he had a program that he thought was very important because the Times had too many foreign correspondents who were geriatric, as he put it. I mean, they were just too old. He wanted to get people overseas under the age of 30. And so his deal was he wanted me to work for him for a year on the foreign desk, during which I would work on the report every day, and I would also write for the foreign desk and so on. And after a year of doing that, I would go on the Metro staff as a staff reporter. I would do that for 2 or 3 years, and then I'd go overseas. Well, that was fine. Clifton Daniel was then the executive editor, and he basically let Topping do whatever he wanted to. But Daniel was succeeded by Abe Rosenthal. And Abe Rosenthal had this thing about how no one went overseas before the age of 30 because they hadn't made all their mistakes yet. And it's one thing to make a mistake in New York City where you could just put a correction in the paper the next day. But as he put it, you make a mistake in a place like Poland, you could cause a war. So he didn't want anybody overseas that hadn't made all the mistakes yet. The result was I'd stayed another 5 or 6 years in New York, and then I went overseas. But I would say Topping was really the person who most impressed me and most I really most looked up to in that respect. I mean, there were others along the way, of course. I mean, there was a wonderful executive producer at CBS News named Sandy Sokolow, who's alas also not with us anymore. I've had many colleagues along the way I've admired. I hope have admired me. But in terms of the person I would really look up to say, that's who I would like to emulate, it would be Topping. Yeah.
Thanks. And scholars agree that I think in order to have a vibrant democracy, you have to have informed voters.
In order to have what?
You have to have informed voters.
Yes.
You have to know what's
Right.
going on. The problem that I have with a lot of my friends is that it seems like we don't even agree on facts anymore because the media bubbles that we just don't even intersect anymore. What ideas do you think that you would give to maybe kind of bridge that to try to make sure that our media is more healthy, that people are a little bit more informed, that are there any ideas, or are you as pessimistic I think as I am?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. What happened while I was sitting here, I got an email. I had sent an email to a friend of mine named Gerard Koenig. Koenig is he's a philosophe, a French philosophe, a young guy. He's written a number of books. He has a think tank here called something Libre, Pensée Libre, or something like that. And I spotted a Q&A. I spotted a Q&A that had been that he had given to Le Figaro. Now I read every part of the French press. I read a lot of world press too, but I certainly read. I read Le Monde, I read Libération, I read Figaro, I read Le Point. I watch the major websites from France Info, and so on. So he said, he emailed to me. Well, I said, congratulations on a very interesting interview. He said, he says, you're starting to read the right-wing press, huh? I said to him, I read all of the press all of the time. I think it's an obligation for everybody to do that, and I think that the more of you. I have a nephew who's a very smart guy. He was a managing director at Goldman Sachs and so on. He left that. He now trades for his own account, which I kind of understand why. But he's a determined Trumpist. I mean, an irreconcilable Trumpist. And he will not. He thinks, by the way, that even the Wall Street Journal editorial page is too left wing. So he will not watch anything other than Fox News. He reads very few newspapers, I think. And he is just determined he just has his blinders on. He refuses. I mean, my entire family is subscribed to Andelman Unleashed. He won't do it, because he said, I know what you're going to say. I mean, he doesn't know what I'm going to say. That's the whole problem. But he thinks he does. And that's really unfortunate. I don't know how you break through that kind of mentality. I finally just given up, after 4 years of trying. I've just given up. So, but he's a very intelligent guy. He graduated from Bowdoin. Went to one of the top. He went to Hotchkiss School. I mean, very top private school in the U.S. You know, but he's just for some reason somehow he became a huge Trumper. And
So how do you explain a hugely intelligent guy who puts those blinders on?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't. They don't go together.
What I'm trying to find out is whether his wife believes the same thing, because she is a cancer doctor at Memorial Sloan Kettering of some renown, and he has 2 daughters, and he's. I mean, I don't know how they're being raised, but because I don't see them that much. They live upstate now, but I don't know. It's depressing, I must say.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think it's partly we sometimes assume that people make their political understandings or views on the basis of logic or rational thought, or whatever. But the older I get, I seem to come to the conclusion that more and more people form their political views as an emotional response to things. And I think the Trump. I'm Australian, so you guys know more about Trumpism than I do. But I think what Trumpism does, it connected to certain people emotionally. So it doesn't really matter about facts or how educated somebody is or whatever. If it connects to them emotionally, that's what they.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that. There certainly is an emotional response. There's no doubt about that. But you know, it's certain, that's true in every country. I mean, the Le Pen people here. I go back 40 years actually. I first met in the early 80s. I met her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen. And I traveled around the country with him for CBS. I did the first profile of Jean-Marie Le Pen on American television, prime time for the CBS Evening News. And I mean, it was an amazing scene to see this. I mean, these people treated him like the Messiah. We went down to near Lake Annecy in La France Profonde, deep France. And they had this huge white tent, like a revival tent, you know? And he walks into this room, and there are, several thousand people there in this tent. And he's walking down, and it's literally as though the Messiah had come. They're throwing themselves in front of him. They're cheering. Just they've lost their minds over this guy, and he's going like that. He's like, he's loving it. He's eating it up, right? And so later on, after all of that, we go back to his house for the final interview for this package. And we finished the interview in this. He has a house, a nice house, beautiful house in Saint Cloud, outside of Paris. And he finishes, and this little blonde girl, about 12 years old, with pigtails, comes jumping into the room, and he says, "I want to introduce you to the first female president of France, Marine Le Pen." He already knew. It was already programmed, right? So. Yeah, it is an emotional response, but it's an emotional response that has had built up over generations sometimes, especially in this country. It goes to generations. So.
Why does she have such a strong following?
Why does she have such a strong following? Oh, I think that I think a lot of it is simply people who are very simple. The reason that a lot of Trump people have a strong following like that. They see themselves as left behind. And they see themselves as having fallen out of a society that doesn't care about them anymore. And that's especially true out in the countryside, if you go out to the countryside. But it's very interesting. I was out in the village of Provence, which is the kind of the last village in the Ile-de-France before you fall off the Ile-de-France into the France Profonde, right? And I was talking to the mayor out there, and I was talking to the owner of this little bistro. The mayor is a figure of some note in Les Républicains. His predecessor was Alain Peyrefitte, who was mayor of that city for 32 years, and he wasn't prime minister, but he had virtually every other job in the cabinet. He was minister of justice, he was minister of the interior, and everything. So it's a Les Républicains area, and Christian Jacob, who's the leader of Les Républicains in the Assemblée Nationale, he's the sort of the party boss of that area. So I got to talking to and of course he's totally Les Républicains, the mayor. I got to talking to the owner of this little bistro literally right across the street from the mairie. And I said, "Who'd you vote for?" And he said, "Well, He said, the first round, he said, I voted for Le Pen. I said, really? I said, oh, okay. And who'd you vote for the second round? He said, I voted blank. I said, but you voted for Le Pen for the first round. In the second round, you voted blank. Why? He said, I couldn't see putting her in charge of France. And I said, well, then the first round, why didn't you vote for Pécresse, who is the Les Républicains candidate? And she is actually from that region. And he said, she said, she's too arrogant. Too arrogant. So I can imagine someone saying a French person is too arrogant, but anyway. So I don't know. I mean, I think that people are programmed into these things, and I think the reason that they haven't gotten, I do think that there is a certain percentage. I used to think it was maybe 30 or 35%. Now maybe it's 40%, and I don't think that she can get above that. I think there are still more than half of this country are too scared to turn. They don't want to turn their country over to someone like that. There is still enough of the DNA of people who were in the Resistance, who lived through the whole Nazi era. They're all, almost every one of them, firsthand, is dead now, long dead. But they still understand the dangers of really turning it into a right-wing extremist, this country. So I don't think that's going to happen. And frankly, if Macron and his people have a chance in this next Sunday, it's because people will not want to turn their country over to any extremes, left or right. And so that's where I think you might have a shot at it.
I recommend just about everybody to watch Sorrow and the Pity if you want to know a little bit about
Le Chagrin, Le Pitié.
after effects.
Oh, the other thing I must commend to you all is if you have Netflix, the Zelensky series on Netflix is hilarious. It's wonderful. It is it's called Servant of the People, and we've been watching it. There's like 40 episodes of it, 30 minutes each, and it's him. I mean, and he's of like 10 years ago, but he's exactly like he is now in this series, and you can see that. I mean, you can almost see the script writers having scripted a lot of this stuff from this. He's a high school history teacher who goes on this rant against society, against some of his kids, and someone is secretly recording this and puts it on the internet, and it goes completely viral, and the result is that he gets on the ballot and he wins as president of Ukraine.
And then it really happened.
And then it really happens, right? But to listen to this thing is just priceless. So anyway, I commend it to you. Servant of the People. We have 18 minutes.
We do. Any other questions?
And you have enough film for that?
It's going. So as long as it's going, it's not film, fortunately, but it is power.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who else? Nobody? All right. So here is my final. Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, please. No, please.
Ask anything about the Biden administration, how they're doing in terms of red lines, or Biden talking off the cuff? What's your sense of his administration and the people around him?
Well, so Biden is another person I thought really could have a shot at having a Weltanschauung, but he doesn't. I mean, and he's been
Having a what?
a Weltanschauung.
Oh yeah, right. A worldview.
Remember Weltanschauung?
A worldview.
Yeah, right. Very good. But he doesn't. And, so I think from the beginning, he has been saddled by a series of crises, but he really has not focused on where he wants to take his country or the world. And he's been ping-ponging, and that's really unfortunate. He does have a tendency to talk off the cuff. I think he's restrained himself a lot in that respect. He's also been a victim of circumstances, let's face it. I mean, he's been dealt a tough hand, but I don't know if he's handled it all that effectively. It's, you have to say that $1 trillion that he gave to everybody was really useful at the time, but man, that really has fueled inflation. There's no doubt about that. And the Fed single-handedly can't do that. Well, they're trying to now, and they're going to send us into recession. It's very depressing, I must say. So I'd rather not talk too much about it. In terms of red lines, I don't think he's done much to change them, very frankly. I mean, he certainly hasn't revived the JCPOA. That is really too bad, the Iran treaty. I was kind of hoping that would be done pretty quickly. It's not, and I think from what I hear from people I've talked to in Vienna and elsewhere, that Iran is within, a few weeks of being able to have enough uranium to produce a nuclear weapon. Now, the Grand Ayatollah says they don't want to have a nuclear bomb ever, but who knows what the Revolutionary Guards want, right? So there we are. My son always says that I have a very pessimistic view of the world, and that and so much of my stories I write are pessimistic and negative and whatever, and so I'd want to try and end on a high note. So my high note is, become fervent and devoted readers of Andelman Unleashed. And I really am unleashed on it, and it's great. And I have all kinds of interest, not just the French election. It's been heavy on French elections in the last couple of months, but I'm going off into all other kinds of interesting tangents. I did a piece for Airmail, which was Graydon Carter's webzine magazine, and I've now expanded that into a very big piece for Andelman Unleashed. It's about this 85-year-old couple from Kharkiv, who are actually related to a cousin of mine, Mikhail Andelman, who is part of the Andelman family, who stayed behind in Moldova and then in Ukraine when my half of the family came over in around 1903, 1902. So
Your family's from the Ukraine?
yes, well, half of it. The other half is from Lithuania. And I know, in fact, I know the village it's from. They're from Yedinets, and I've been in touch with the mayor of Yedinets. I had an email from him this morning, believe it or not. Right.
Impressive.
We write via Google Translate, so I don't know how much of it is getting through, actually, but. Did you want to say something?
I just said I'm Lithuanian, Ukrainian.
You're from Ukraine also? Your family? At any rate, this piece on Igor and Larissa, the in-laws of my cousin Mikhail, it should be running in the next week or so on Andelman Unleashed. It's pretty good, and they escaped finally from Kharkiv. They had not escaped when the Airmail magazine piece ran. It was still there, but they have managed to escape, and their escape itself is really quite remarkable. And they're now in Denver, Colorado, so safe. I guess I gave something away. I shouldn't have said that, but I actually talk about it in the piece.
So what's coming up next, David? Anything on the horizon? I know that you recently had a panel discussion at the American Library.
I did. We'll have more
anything else?
panels. We'll have more discussions at the American Library. The Overseas Press Club is doing a series. We should have one in the fall. I'll be back here in October, so we'll probably be doing one then. Probably on the American elections, and how the French might be looking at it. I write at least once or twice a week for Andelman Unleashed. I write every couple of weeks for CNN Opinion. You can find that by Googling Andelman, CNN Opinion. And I'm working on I'm trying to figure out a subject for another book. I have a couple of ideas that I'm working with my agent on. We'll see what happens. But
that was my next question. What's
well,
your
the
next
paperback,
book?
A paperback of this one should be en route eventually. What I'm trying to find now is the perfect person to do a preface. The preface to this book, you will see, was done by Harry Evans, Sir Harold Evans. Harry was a great friend, and he was an extraordinary journalist. He was the editor of the Times of London and the Sunday Times, and really with a real Weltanschauung. So he wrote the preface for that book. I got to find. I've had several offers of people who might do it. So when the paperback comes out of that, it'll also be revised and updated. That's some cap you got there. What is that?
The Golden State Warriors.
Is what?
It's a basketball team.
Whoa, a basketball team. Okay.
Been in the news as of late.
Which one?
Golden State Warriors.
Golden State Warriors. They beat
If
the.
you're from the Bay Area.
They were playing. They were playing.
you
They
have a
were playing
question?
my Boston Red Sox, right? My Boston Red Sox. Boston Celtics. Boston Celtics, right? Boston Celtics.
We have another
To end
question.
on a happy note, do you have any upscale predictions for the demos in the fall?
Democrats.
Oh, not good.
We've heard of that, though.
Nothing good. The Democratic, you mean the elections in November? What? Is that what you? What?
November, this coming November.
Yeah.
What's your take?
I don't know. Look, the off-year party, the out-of-office party in the off-year elections, they always do better. And this year, if the stock market's this bad and the economy's this bad and gasoline's about $5 a gallon, I have to tell you something. Who knows how much gasoline is per gallon in France? Per gallon.
2 euros plus.
How much?
2 euros.
Oh, really?
But that's per
per
liter.
liter.
Per
Okay,
liter.
so I calculated this morning
Four.
how much it is.
about $10.
It's $8.17 a liter, right? A gallon right now.
Right.
$8.17 a gallon is the average
Is that
price of
euros
regular
or
here.
dollars? Euros or dollars?
$8.17, and we're complaining, we're bitching about gas being over $5. Can you imagine? Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, we could. That's one reason we're here.
And there we have a perfect segue to the commercial from our sponsor.
Well, I mean, to pay more for gasoline? No, but you know,
No, right.
it's worth it.
Coca-Cola costs per gallon.
So, this is true. Which is why
More
my son
than
who lives.
wine.
It is why my son who lives here bought.
Lee.
It's why my son who lives here just bought an all-electric car
Yeah.
in Paris. But he has a garage in his apartment that he can charge it every night. So anyway, so thank you everybody
Thank
for
you.
coming. Andelman Unleashed. I'll sign books out in front. I will sign books out in front.